Okay, so welcome to my show, My Planets in What. I'm Danny, your neighborhood astrologer, and today we're joined by Wade Caves, who, from what I understand, really turns astrology into like very practical strategy. That's kind of my read, that's my take. Maybe he'll elaborate on that. But a little bit later, we'll also be diving into Jane Austen's chart. So, yes, there is romance in the sky today.
Yeah, well, that probably describes me. When I first got into astrology, I was just kind of taking anything and everything in. I first got into astrology because I was moving a lot and making friends with new groups of people all the time. And I moved to a new school and everyone was obsessed with Sailor Moon. So astrology is not a huge jump. Like Mars, fire, got it. Venus, beauty,
You're
got
like,
it.
this is similar,
Well, I
nerdy.
remember having the express thought because my dad he had made some side eyes at me for watching Sailor Moon because it is a very feminine program, and I just absolutely loved it. But at the time, I remember feeling a little bit like too seen. Like it was a little like, oof, I didn't like that look at
Mm.
all. I thought I was having this private moment with this show that I loved, and like, that's it. So studying astrology also like was an easy adoption for me because it felt like I got to keep the subject and the theme alive, but covertly in a language that he wouldn't recognize was connected. And so that
That's
was
so
kind of
funny that you're like your more private space was astrology, even though it's also like kind of very, mystical and in some ways of the same world.
mm,
It's funny that you mentioned, I think talking about people's sort of origin story as astrologers, my best friend in high school, her mom was an astrologer, and I was instantly fascinated because I'm like, she knows
yeah, because
things.
I
Like,
remember you said you got into this really early, right?
yeah, in high school, and I was like, she knows something. Like, I want to know what she knows.
Yeah.
And I forget the name of her teacher, but she, was a regular in her class. And as I'm sure you know, it's like every class you come back and you're like, I want to try this new thing I learned, this new technique. And so you come through the existing charts you have and you're trying to like, oh, okay, you're mapping things out. But it was instantly something I related to because Mm, well, one of the things I love talking about how people work, especially
Mm,
on an emotional level. And so to open these conversations of like, oh, like your moon's in, whatever, Taurus, Sagittarius, and just being able to suddenly access much, much more intimate conversations. Like for me, that
yeah.
was the draw because I was like, we would have never had this conversation otherwise.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think when I came into astrology, I didn't even have that kind of desire. I loved the idea that there was this underlying pattern that could give us some information about the nature of reality that like, oh my God, is it really right here? That kind of thing. Like that felt good, and I enjoyed the exploration of that. But I have to be honest, like personality astrology never really drew me. That was not something that I wanted. And the reason was because when I first started, oh God, this was so embarrassing. I had, kind of nursed this interest in astrology for many, many, 10 years or something like this, and just like casually had this interest that I would pull out for dinner parties, make a funny little comment, but no one in the room knew more than me. As little as I knew, no one knew more. So it wasn't ever like a, it was fine for me to just throw something out there and we can move on. And then I went into this, like hanging out with my friends, for instance, and their parents. And I was talking about one of my friends was like, "Look at my birth chart," and so I was probably like 19 at the time, and so I started looking at it and just throwing out some ideas that I remember reading in a book, and like all this kind of stuff. And I was saying stuff that I'm sure was fine, but the dad in the next room was like, "Who in this house does that not describe?" Who? He stopped everything and he's like grabbing this person, this person. He's like, "Does that describe you? Does that describe you?" And everybody's like, "Yeah." Oh my God, it was so embarrassing. And like,
Aw.
yeah, it was so crazy.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's really only so far you can take that kind of stuff, and there is that tendency to say overly broad things, which is why, yeah, when the first time I stepped into Arthur's class, I was like, oh, like my moon's in Sagittarius, or whatever, and he's like, so
Yeah, see, that's the attitude that I've got now too. It's like, okay, you know,
it's like
we've
there's
all
no
got Sagittarians
context.
somewhere. There's no
There's
context.
no there's no context, and it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, what house is it? What house does it own?
Sure.
Um, and so that was it wasn't until I was like 22-ish when I walked into his class and was like, I had to unlearn everything that I thought I knew, which is like a
Mm,
lot of what you're talking about, and really get back to basics. And the core of his class was horary, and so it was just unlearning, everything that you think is associated with the signs,
yeah.
um, and
Yeah,
learning a
that's a
lot more about the planets.
Yeah, that's a really big path that I think a lot of new astrologers have to get back to. I mean, we can pick up some real topics now with that kind of thing. I just want to say also, that dad who said that, I mean, we're still really close friends with that family. Like, it
No,
really
no, it's
wasn't that big of a
okay.
deal. Yeah. And I
Yeah,
just
you
kind
were
of felt like
embarrassed.
I feel like I want to be able to be more specific with this. And so I'm going to just let it sit until I am ready to either commit to learning or, and I found horary not long thereafter. And so that kind of shifted how I studied. But when you pick up these more traditional techniques or, um, these more specialist applications, or certain things that just the general approach that happens, in the broad marketplace doesn't necessarily generate anything in these places. So horary astrology is a great example. Like, we've got to be a little bit more technical, right, wrong, or indifferent. There needs to be a little bit kind of more nuance there. But one of the things that, when you hear technical, you think to yourself, like, oh, I've got to memorize rules. I'm not even talking about that. Like, when you step out into the street, everybody talks about their sign, and all the conversation seems to be so focused on sign-based symbolism, sign-based astrology, but it's really the planets or the baseline of
Yeah,
everything. The
right,
the circle where we find the constellations that eventually gave names. That zodiacal circle, constellations are separate, but they're all along the same band. That's the path of the planets. The only reason those were selected is because that's where the sun is moving. That's the path towards the sun. And just like
right,
houses are the same, we wouldn't even have houses in the same way, because it's all about the sun's rising and its setting, whether a house is a good thing or a dark thing. It's the whole solar journey. So at the end of the day, it always comes back to the planets. That's the core fundamental thing.
yeah,
Um,
100%. Yeah,
yeah,
we have the same exact understanding of those things, and I think that's just the education in horary. I think, it's all
yeah,
about the planets, and I think that's for people who are learning. I think that's probably shocking, even sometimes, to say that, like, Venus in Taurus doesn't mean anything except for that it's in a really comfortable place,
mm,
that it matters even less that it's in Taurus and just more that it's in a really good place.
yeah.
So just taking a step away from what you think of as the zodiac symbology, and that it really being about the planet and that Venus being strengthened.
You can practice perfectly good astrology without signs. I don't know that I recommend it. It's like, if you wanted to adopt a stylistic approach, and like this was an art form and you wanted to step into that kind of space, you could absolutely practice, beautiful, exquisite astrology based on the angles and the planets and no signs. It's entirely possible. But you can practice astrology without the planets. That's what you can't do.
Right.
That's not work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is really good conversation for people who are like learning to just be like, huh, I wonder what they're talking about, and then do a little bit more digging.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, we have a couple fun questions before we kind of dive more into. So, like, is there a sign that is kind of like your knee-jerk reaction, like, oh God, like Virgos, or of like Aries or whatever? Is there a sign that just like, I know
I
you don't have to.
I have an answer. That's the problem. I
You do, just
am,
say it. Just
yeah,
say
it's
it.
not universally applicable. I have to say that I do think that social media got this right. It is not, these things are not universally applicable. But I have got the most debilitating weak spot for Gemini men, and it's like not, it is not good. It
Oh,
is
so it's
not
like
great. When I
it's a
meet somebody who's a
it's an
Gemini, I know I'm
attraction.
about to go through it. That's all I know. It is
Oh,
like, oh my God. All right. That's all. But
oh.
I'm mostly, no, I am mostly joking.
No, I
But
know,
it
but
is
that's a
funny.
trying to your son. Do you have you have air in your chart, right? Do you have
I have
Libra?
the sun in Aquarius, yeah, and Mercury in Aquarius also. I mean, all that's good. The issue, I've got Mars, Saturn, and Uranus in Sag, so there's a little bit of that going
Oh,
on.
the
But it's really
opposition.
never the Gemini. No, it's never the Gemini thing. I have in my birth chart these really intense squares between Venus and Mars and Venus and Saturn, and inevitably, and when I meet somebody, I don't ask for their astrology. I don't want to know. I don't want to talk about work. I'll talk about
I
work in
know.
terms of like what I'm excited
I
about. I
know.
don't
I
want to
know.
work.
I know.
Yeah. So
I know. I back when I was dating a lot, avoided it until I like had to know.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I just had to know. But at
I
first,
don't
I
know
think
that
it's
the have to know ever really happens for me, but I'm actually just perfectly fine never knowing. But the thing is, because I like my mind to be a little bit freer than, thinking about it all the time. But inevitably, it does somehow show up. Somebody wants me to, like, would you just take a look and, like, blah blah blah. It's like I'm not gonna say no. So if it's then given in that kind of context, inevitably these people, it's like it's not the Gemini thing that's the problem. It's that plus the fact that their Saturn's and right plugging into my Venus Saturn thing, or their Mars is plugging right into my Venus Mars thing. So it's just a funny bit of luck that they've all been Geminis.
I do a lot of like compatibility type things, and like it's funny because I can spend a lot of time like looking at all the details and like aspects and all these things, and I could say, oh, there's going to be more tension than harmony, or either sexual chemistry, but not enough ease of communication or whatever. But at the end of the day, like that doesn't necessarily say if those people are going to stick together. And I
Yeah.
find that like a horary chart does a lot better job of like talking about the what's happening in the relationship, but what's happening next. So
Yeah.
I find a horary to be much more meaningful and actually much more efficient for those kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. But I also think, the one cautionary tale is, don't ask if you're not ready to look and face the possibility. Sometimes people ask because they so desperately want it to work out, and they just want to know that it will, so they can stop being anxious or let down their walls and let somebody in, or any of the other things that are going on. And in that stage, I think what can be really challenging is then putting the expectation about whether a relationship lasts on the back of a deeper question, which is just, how do I find some security in what I'm going through right now, whatever the situation is. So frequently when people want to talk about, will this relationship last? Is there a future in this relationship? There's almost always some undercurrent of something bigger that's probably pattern driven. Not the first time we've been down this road. You're experiencing it. You're coming to me because you're insecure. You're not going to pay money for something where, you are absolutely confident that this is going to last well into the next lifetime. You're coming from a place of a little bit of insecurity. So what's helpful is that that chart then can show you the dynamics that are currently in motion, where some of that anxiety might be coming from, some possible approaches to how to address it, to what extent it might be pressing in and causing strain in your relationship, or is it maybe all in your head that it's causing strain and you should chill out a little bit? Or, is there a deeper problem that needs addressing? You just have, when there's a real matter in front of you, there's a real thing to consider. And whether the relationship works out or not, so often to me doesn't seem like the thing. They want this one to work out because it's this one and it's here now, right? It's usually like a bigger thing about finding commitment, finding stability, finding security. So you can open up the door as wide on those points as you like, but um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on all of that. You know, if someone's coming to you with questions, they feel insecure, and it's that difficult job of trying to really coach somebody and offer them support. And then there's the how much do you tell them if it's like if there's a hard no, it's not going to go anywhere, you know?
yeah.
How do you communicate that? And
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, you gotta, and this is where both sides have to take responsibility for what they've locked themselves into. Like, you can't be asking questions you're not ready to hear a no to, and you can't be taking questions if you're not ready to say no. Like, everyone's got to be ready for the worst case scenario, and that also means like all of the emotional follow up that can come off the back of that. And if you're not, it's one of those moments when you get new students in horary that are excited to try it out, and they'll just take anything on, but there's going to come a day where you realize, I wish that my counseling skills or my skills and discretion, knowing what to say, what to hold back, how to test and prod for this, it's a whole art. Like, I can look at a horary chart and have for myself an idea fairly well mapped out within seconds about what I want to communicate and what I think the chart is communicating, but I'll spend the next 45 minutes figuring out how to say it, you know? It kind of
yeah,
feels sometimes.
yeah, yeah. I keep thinking I've been doing a lot of questions lately, like with people who are dating. Like, does
So
this person, what's going to
I
happen
think
with
you
this
do
person?
relationship astrology, right? Like, that's a main part of your repertoire,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And
yeah.
what
And
do
so
you do?
it's
So
like,
you principally, is this what you're saying? You principally look at horary charts related to relationships?
Yes, mostly because like I said, it's sometimes a waste of time to get the other person's birthday and like look at all the aspects and compatibility points,
Yeah.
like and then to just be like look at a four and like, oh, they don't like you.
Mm,
Or you or
interesting.
you actually don't like them.
Mm,
You just want to. You want to
right.
like them, but you don't. You don't, and it's like as simple as just looking at, their ruling planet and how the other planet receives them. I mean, a lot of times that answers the question in and of itself.
I think what can
Um,
also be tough, I just, jumping on top of what you're saying, for effect. The the thing about looking at synastry between two individuals is that synastry is kind of like locked in for a lifetime. Like if you want to understand what that synastry is looking like today and how these stories are kind of get, there are techniques for this, right? Like, you know, progressions, for instance. One thing that I heard, I don't even remember where I heard it. I'm just going to say it was Lynn Bell, because that feels possible. But there was a comment about, two people coming together because all their beautiful synastry was actually revealed in secondary progressions. And so they'd have all these lovely contexts, this on that and that. But progressions move. And when the progressions do eventually move, the relationship cools and then the connection fades. And you can almost just time it by the transit of the secondary progression. So there are ways, of course, in which like two people's astrology, even though it's locked in place because you were born when you were born, they were born when they were born, and that is kind of locked in what it is. But to answer like what does that say about right here and right now, a birth chart alone is not going to answer. You have to apply so many other techniques. And so I have to say I fully agree with you that a horary gets to the heart of it much more efficiently, and I think Lee is a lot less guesswork. It gets to the quick, you know. um
yeah, and again, it's like I can do all that work.
yeah.
I'm happy to. I know how,
Yeah,
but the horary just speaks for itself.
I
It's
understand.
just
Yeah.
uh so it I think going deeper in charts, especially progressions, is really fun for looking at how you've grown and evolved. I find when I was earlier on as an astrology student, I would read birth charts for people who are older, like people in their 50s and 60s, and they'd be like, I don't really relate with that. Like, I kind of was like that in my 20s, or, and then so they've like really outgrown that natal chart. And so it becomes kind of meaningless to really spend time there. And so,
Mm.
I think the progressions and looking at other things in solar returns is much more interesting.
The thing about a horary though is it's meant to respond to a situation that's in development. Like it's active, it's, popping. So I think it's a good way to jump in. I agree with you.
So, so when it comes to like, it's Hori your go-to tool when you're practicing kind of your sessions, or what's your go-to tool in general when you're sitting down?
Hmm. Well, I think it has to be horary, but that's because I might be applying a broader expectation about what a horary chart could be or is. For most consultations, some element of the work we do will involve an interpretation of the astrology at which point we connected. Like to
Mm.
discuss this theme, to review this theme, to navigate, negotiate with it, to figure out what to do next. Like when that moment happens, whatever it is. Now, sometimes in a horary consultation, if we got an appointment at 10 a.m., could take 15, 20 minutes before we even get there. I might have to listen to what the detail is, what their real concerns are, review things, back up. Sometimes it happens instantaneously, but today I had three consultations and none of them started within the first 10 minutes. Like the chart is timed for not within the first 10 minutes of our discussion. So it takes a little time to kind of get there. And then there's your horror. We understand what we're exploring. That's the exact same process I use in my natal consultations too. Like, what are you here to talk about today? Like, what's on your heart? What's on your mind? But maybe the shift is different now. We're not trying to resolve a situation. We're zooming out a little bit. We're looking at how the ebb and flow in the particular things that are on your mind, how those get explored. Like, this is how I feel about natal astrology, horary astrology, mundane astrology. We have many different methods of investigating reality with astrology. And one thing that we can do, and we frequently do, is we take a look at transits that are coming, progressions that are about to happen, and we make a guess as to what these things are like. That's part of what we do, right? So you start with the symbol and then you interpret it your way down. The other approach which I find to be exceedingly more efficient, is to start with what's happening in your life and let me find the signature that that relates to and build out. And it might, you may come to me, for instance, because Mars is progressing over your midheaven, and you think that's the story because you saw it in your software. But every story that you're telling me is coming back down to transits with like Moon Saturn opposition that's in your birth chart, also in on the angles in your solar return. And so this is actually probably a very different type of story than what this is. So it's like when you go into the doctors, for instance, you could go for a general health checkup, and they'll take your vitals and make sure that nothing's like jumping out at them. But that's a very different experience and many things will be missed. Like if there's a cancer developing, for instance, unless there are particular types of screenings that you're doing, that might not get noticed. So, but there are very different experiences to be had when you step into a physician's office and you say, I'm coming to you because I like to get a colonoscopy, for instance, or I'd like to get a mammogram. I'd like to do this, do that, and let's focus for a specific purpose here and see what else happens. So you start somewhere you need to discuss, and you move out, and you allow all the things that naturally fall in. I feel like that makes the job a lot more reliable. So I would say that in a natal consultation, that would just be a consultation chart, but there is effectively no difference. Because at the end of the day, what's happening is you're coming to me saying, I want to talk about X, and I'm saying, got it. Let me pull the picture down. We'll talk it out. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be present in everything I do, from electional astrology, mundane astrology. Mundane astrology is going to be a little bit more centered on different themes, events that happen, announcements that are made, lunations, things that have definitely occurred, that are signaling some kind of motion or change. But so maybe that's a little bit harder to map that there. But there's still the tops down versus bottoms up kind of thing with mundane astrology, where you could look at a Saturn Jupiter conjunction and go, well, something in the news, obviously, about a Saturn Jupiter conjunction. Or you can take a look at the astrology of that particular event and see if those degrees of the Saturn Jupiter conjunction are actually activated. Is that part of the story, or is it responding to a different signature entirely? So, sorry, I realize that I've just been talking nonstop, but I wanted to close the loop on the mundane side because I just dropped that and then didn't
No,
follow it
I'm
up.
just no, I'm just like soaking it in. I think it's just interesting. I mean, I'm interested in hearing you talk this through. I think everybody has their approach, talking to Judith Roberts 2 weeks ago. She's a psychologist turned astrologer. She's very big on mythology, and her readings
Yeah,
focus a lot on, especially like Pluto, and and also she's really interested in the Venus mythology. She really enjoyed your talk about that at Norwalk. And Letty, as a Vedic astrologer, who's another friend of mine, it's like, what's the mythology of this placement? And it's like
yeah,
diving into that story. And I think there's something really to be said for that, because people do think in stories, they think in imagery,
yeah. We think in
and
pictures, we feel in images. Spiritual experiences happen there. But this is the thing. Before, you had talked about me being kind of more of like a practical astrologer, and I consider myself a deeply spiritual person. But it's like my spirituality would look a lot like a hobbit's. I think it's like very simple. Just do good, honorable work and pay attention to what you're doing and enjoy your. I don't know, that's a little bit simplistic, but the thing is, it's not overly developed. It's really focused on trying to make heaven on earth a little bit, out of your own life and the lives around you. So it does feel a little bit kind of more practical and practically grounded. But even in doing that very practical form of astrology, where you're not focused on, um, well, where you're focused a little bit more on specific resolute outcomes or specific problems or things that you can delineate and explain in some kind of way and talk about, that can sometimes still reveal and lead to some pretty deep and spiritual places for some folks.
oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that it wouldn't. I mean, my approach doesn't always dive super deep into like the myths and stories. I feel like I have a very practical approach to things in terms of like I said earlier, maybe this is just more reflective of myself. I love to get into deep conversations, for sure, and I am a very spiritual person.
Mhm.
But when it comes to like yes, no situations, or and what should I do about this? I'm very like matter of fact. I'm like, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Um, and then that spiritual conversation is for me, it tends to be more about like that personal development where like the solar returns and where do I think you could dig deeper and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing. Like, I think we need people like out there. The only place where I kind of attend to things spiritually is like in the moment kind of stuff. I know there's like broad, big arcs and stories of things that we kind of discuss also with clients, but um, I feel I have Mercury angular, and one of the things about having an angular Mercury
Same.
is that you just do better when you're in the minutia, and it's easier to kind of make the point among the very small pieces of the puzzle that I have, and I have to let the people who do bigger, big picture stuff do their thing, and I think that that's a lot of people's strength. I think I have an expectation that things are too unstable to say anything too long. Like, I don't expect any forecast I give about something 3 years from now to actually make any sense. The world's changing too fast. People's desires are changing.
Yeah.
Economic realities are changing too fast. So everything feels, and that interesting. I never thought about that life feels so unreliable that it's actually changing how I'm working with annual forecasting within my work because of just that issue. I hadn't actually considered that so plainly.
Yeah, you're intuitively kind of understanding that this might not play out this way.
Yeah, this.
Even if you're really like on the money in some ways, you know. Um,
Yeah.
okay, let's look at Jane Austen's chart. I know
Ha.
you had mentioned you wanted to look at that. I love
Yeah.
doing my segment, which is called Famous Uranus.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Well, she's got a little bit of Uranus story in here too, so that'll be kind
it
of our place.
does, so
Close.
it's
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
perfect. So I
Yeah.
have it pulled up. I'll drop it onto the screen for the listeners who watch on YouTube. But let's
Yeah.
talk.
Are you
Let's
going to
dive
use
into. I had to.
the clip that I gave you? I think that is like
Yeah,
a
I can
really
use
good
that. That's really
use
pretty.
that one. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful. That comes from Isabel Pagan's From Pioneer to Poet, which is such a fun book, and it's out of print. So get a copy if you find it at a used bookstore. It says, or the 12 Great Gates, an expansion of the signs of the zodiac analyzed. So it's a book all about the things that we said you have to unlearn later. But the thing is that's really great about it is that there's such like juicy discussion of each sign from mythology and different kind of characteristics. It's like you would read a section and it feels a little bit all over the place. Deborah Holding has done a presentation about this text because there's actually more things happening under the surface than people realize. I have not read it from start to finish, only pieces, but there's just so many good gems in here. It's like a sentence on this page, a sentence on that
I
page.
love that. I'll definitely check it out. I love, I'm a big fan of John Frawley's books.
Yeah,
And
he was an
to
early
me,
source for me when I first started studying horary. I
oh
remember.
really?
Mhm.
Yeah, his books. And I just opened his sports astrology book again because I just got into the Dodgers. Like never was a sports person, but I just
Yeah.
got into it. And it's so fun to like look at a electional chart for a game
Yeah.
and just try to figure out who's in the stronger position.
What's so
So
funny
much
about
fun.
that book? When I think about that book, there's this one story, just a little bit of like, Deb Holding told me once that like there was, she put out her book, Houses, Temples of the Sky, which is bright red. And it was like, you go to conferences, you go to the
Oh,
bookstore, and you could see her book from across the room because it is bright red. And John's at the time, I think, was this dark green, and you
yeah,
couldn't find it amongst anything else. It was the
but
horary
sports
textbook. But
astrology.
hold on for a second. So the red book is out on the
It's
table, and Deb
astrology.
points. She's like, "Look at that! You can see my book from halfway across the hall." And then just like elbows him. So the next year, he comes out with his book with that bright pink cover, and they go to the conference. And then John says, "You can see my book, can't you, Deborah?"
Oh my
Which
gosh.
I think I've reported that fake cover, and they go to 5 to 10 years since I've heard that
That is
story.
so funny. That's a
Isn't that
funny story. That's a
crazy?
great anecdote. And it's genius. I mean, yeah, why not make your book bright pink? Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted us to look at Jane Austen's chart today for a few reasons. One, lately I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks so that I can still take in. I don't necessarily need to listen to music all the time. And there are just some books that I've always wanted to get around to reading, but I cannot find the time. And honestly, the last thing I want to do is stare at my computer all day long. So staring at a book it still feels like I'm staring at a box sometimes. So even reading doesn't provide the escape sometimes, but listening has been great. And I've just finished listening to Pride and Prejudice. which is my first time reading or actually taking. I didn't know the details of the story. I'd seen Bridget Jones's Diary, and I think that's about as close as I got to understanding the plot of this book, which was exceptional. If you're not familiar with the story, it is about a family that has five young daughters, and the mother is just absolutely beside herself trying to get them married and set on matches. Um, it's and you know, with well-off men, you know, who can take care of them and make sure her daughters are all kind of set. And so this is the context in which the story opens, and we follow Elizabeth Bennet and her uh, Mr. Darcy, the character who's
Hmm.
very somber and authoritative and obstinate, and is giving off frequently an energy of being very proud and looking down his nose at, you know, other people. And Elizabeth Bennet considers herself an excellent judge of character. And the ultimate irony is they have both fallen for each other, but completely misunderstand each other and have to find themselves in the middle. It's a beautiful story, really witty. And so I thought we could take a look at her chart because it's in this book. So we've got it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm excited. I've spent a little bit of time looking at this as well, so I'm excited to talk about it.
What's kind of funny in the Isabel Pagan book is that she got the positions of the outer planets out considerably. Like it's looked like she was using a separate ephemeris for Uranus and Neptune, and she was either the calculations were very wrong, which is possible because she was writing in um, the early 1900s. Yeah, first published in 1911. But she had
Wow.
Uranus at 16 degrees of Gemini, but in fact, on that date, it was at 3 Gemini. So
Okay.
13 degrees out. And then she had Neptune at 3 Libra, but in fact, Neptune was at 24 Virgo. So she's a few years ahead. I don't know how many years that would be, but she's a few years ahead. She's got Neptune 7 degrees out and Uranus 13 degrees out. But other than that, you know, the chart is more or less reliable. But she writes this kind of piece. Now, Jane Austen was an interesting person throughout history. She was the second youngest in a family born in Steventon in England, and was apparently very witty and bright even from a young age. Her father was a cleric, and he was described as very easygoing. And you can see that. So her fourth ruler is Jupiter, and Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter is a good planet to signify somebody who works in the clergy or in any way connected to traditional demonstrations of religion, for instance. And then it was also written that her mother was a fairly funny woman and like hilarious and had her own kind of wit about her and would be signified by Mercury. Now, the thing is that most of Jane Austen's work, in some way or another, seems to criticize the societal structure she was raised in, the way women are dependent so much on marriages and matches to, you know, be able to live their life and kind of move forward. But in her own personal life, she, and this is what was in knowing this, because so some of that biographical detail came from astro.com's bio on her. So if you're interested in reading more about her, there's that. I've got this book in front of me too, which I've read, and I've read her Wikipedia page. She has, so I haven't done like deep research, but she was very interested in a man and fell in love with him. But his family said, absolutely not. You need a family with wealthier connections, and that's not going to be, you need to marry above that station. And then she accepted a proposal a few years later from a man and then immediately rejected it. I think it was like the next morning or something, realizing that she just wasn't in love with him, and she never ended up in a marriage herself. And what it says on the Astro page is that she became a tight-lipped spinster, which I thought was an interesting. Many times in the book, she's described as Elizabeth Bennet, Eliza, I think they call it Lizzie. She's described as having to restrain herself from saying anything because it would step her out of her civility. And she's very conscious about making sure she doesn't lose her cool, keeps tight-lipped on certain things. And then Saturn in Libra is like so perfect for Mr. Darcy because he's actually, you know, this is the signature of somebody who would be well off, that would be well respected, but certainly somebody who would be obstinate, who would not move for anyone. You know, this is the whole picture. But this conjunction is a received conjunction also. So when the moon makes its application to Saturn, it shows that this is actually a good union once it comes together and they learn how to understand each other. And Jupiter on Jane Austen's midheaven is right in between those degrees. So it's moon at 14 Libra, Saturn 19
Mm.
Libra, and then Jupiter is retrograding between them at 15 Gemini. So that
I
I
love
could
that.
strip everything else out of this chart. Those three signatures tell
I
the entire story.
I love that because it reminds me again, kind of thinking back to my teacher that the planets are, characters in a play. He
Mhm.
kind of talked about that a
Planets are
lot.
people too, people.
Yeah, and so like, and it reminds me how creatively, whether you're a writer or a filmmaker, you're gonna be telling the stories that you know in your spirit, and so that telling the stories that are in the chart
Yeah.
through artwork, I think is amazing
Well,
and
and if
makes
you
a
think
lot of
about
sense.
the two of these parties individually represent half of this conjunction. And if you think about this particular conjunction, um, in the story, in the way that it's split, they both were actually afraid of being absolutely denied. At first, Lizzie did deny and turned him down, and then he was going to approach again, and there was fear that maybe he wouldn't. So there was the fear of isolation, the fear of loneliness, the fear of losing the one thing you couldn't be without. That's absolutely resonant with the Moon Saturn conjunction. I think in her case, she has a few other things. She's got a Mercury Jupiter opposition, a Mercury Uranus opposition, a Sun Jupiter opposition, and the moon is heading towards a conjunction with Saturn and a square with Mars. So all of those things is going to lend probably to her sharp wit, but all of those things also can produce difficulty in um, you know, achieving one's aims sometimes from one's own, what do we want to call it? Obstinacy,
I'm
since we've
trying to
used
read
that word
this.
so
Is
far.
is Mercury's in Sag, right?
Mercury's in Sagittarius. Yeah, Mercury is at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Venus is at 9
The
Scorpio.
Since okay, because I'm also like love to dive into the relationship archetype
Yeah,
stuff. So
do it.
for with Virgo rising with Mercury on in Sag, says in detriment, opposing the seventh house ruler. It also in
And
detriment.
that's right. And also remember that the correct Uranus position is 3 Gemini.
So it's even tighter.
It's like 3 degrees out. It's a very sharp opposition.
And my teacher, he wouldn't use the outers all the time unless they were celebrities. But just because it's so close to, and she was a well-known figure. I mean,
Mm.
Uranus is often used as a symbol of divorce. So
Or called off
what
contracts. Jupiter retrograde on the midheaven opposite the sun and Mercury conjunct Uranus ruling the seventh. Okay, so Jupiter's ruling the seventh and it's got all this. That is a really good signature for promises that are not delivered on. It's like so
interesting.
textbook. You can just take it to the bank. That's an undelivered promise. But what was interesting in this story was that she was the one who revoked on her promise. So
Yeah.
she accepted a proposal, but then her heart told her she couldn't marry the man. And it's no fault on her to have said so. Of course, I don't. But I don't know exactly what happened with the dynamics of the first romantic entanglement she had. I don't think there was a wedding proposal, but I think that they were moving in that direction, and it just, it didn't quite work out. But
That's
of course,
tough.
many
That's
people are
tough.
born with first and seventh house oppositions, and and they end up meeting people. It's like brings out a better side to this. I think the thing is that there's just a lot in this chart with the Moon Saturn conjunction, Moon Mars square. There's a certain amount of self satisfaction that comes from that. That might have made this more of a choice than the Astro.com biography seems to suggest. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I
I
mean
would
the
like to know more about what she had to say, if anything, about her own reality.
hmm, yeah. I mean Virgo, Virgo rising.
And she's a writer, and she, when you read what she writes, is always, and this is what makes a classic, is that there is at least three conversations happening. There's the story, and then there's a societal structure issue, and there's a conversation that's very personally happening about what the author's telling you about their life. So as uh when Virgo rising, in my mind, with Mercury, well, I don't know if we can trust the angles on this. All we know is that she was born before midnight. There's a record of that in some what is it, a letter announcing her birth. So I gave you the 11 o'clock p.m. time, but astro.com says 11:45. So I don't know where Mercury is, whether it's angular or not angular. We don't know, but
I mean, it
the
kind of
angles.
makes sense because she's a prolific writer, and in
She's a
Sag,
very
she's
prolific writer.
prolific, just so verbose. That's like the thing. That's
And
like
she's so witty, she's so sharp, and she says things in in like the
just
most,
Sagittarius.
yeah, it's like the most loquacious way to say it too. She's not afraid of a long sentence. She is not afraid to take you from
I
the
love
start of the paragraph to the end. And
my
it's
Sag friends who like they can't just like when you sit down with them and it's been a couple weeks, they have to tell you everything.
yeah, right. Well,
Everything.
yeah. That's how it goes. That's what it's all about. So it's, I think that Virgo rising is super appropriate for her. Or if it hadn't been on the ascendant, on the second or 10th house cusps would have also made fairly good sense to me, because it's but she didn't really hit, I think, mass popularity. She died shortly. She was very young. She was in
Yeah,
her 40s when
40.
she died. Yeah, 46, I think is the number I remember. But she was very young, and she wrote the main corpus of hers. I think she got four main works, and then a couple of other publications as well. But some of these were within 10 years of her passing. So, it's one of these artists or people who leave such an incredible impression on the world, and yet may not have understood the weight of that impression while they were living, which is
Oh
always,
yeah.
a disappointing thing. You always want people to get their flowers while they're here, right?
Yeah.
So,
The last thing, and then we can kind of start to talk about the next segment. But the
next segment.
Venus in Scorpio
Yeah.
in its detriment,
That,
there has to be mentioned. I mean, it's the ruler of her second house, so that to me says like maybe difficulties with finance early on.
what I look at when I see that Venus being on the cusp of the third house, I think that there's always a through line in her work talking about the disadvantaged state of women
Oh,
in her world, in her time. The conversation frequently, again, just seems to be about when you've got a planet in detriment, right? So, like, if you think about Venus and Scorpio, and you had to send Venus a helper, you have like a second to decide this. You have to send Venus a helper. Which planet would you send? She's
the
a
moon.
Scorpio. Okay, I would have sent Mars because Mars understands Scorpio intuitively,
Hmm.
instinctually, understands it completely gets it. The moon wouldn't have been any better in Scorpio, right? It's in its sign of fall.
Oh, I'm thinking of bringing with it, like bringing Libra with it. Okay,
Oh, I
you're
see.
saying, oh, so yeah, yeah, of course, Mars.
Right. So the whole thing is that when a planet's in its sign of debility, it invokes a state of dependency. And I think that's what she wrote about, the dependency
Interesting.
that
I
would
love
in her
that.
era. That's what I see when I
You
look at that
really
because it's from
thought
the
this
third house
through.
class. No, looking at it for the first time with you right now. I mean, I had this earlier today. I double checked that the time was right when I sent it to you. So I did look at it then. But um,
My God, thanks for sharing this. This was so
yeah, I love the
fun.
classics. I'm writing a mundane course right now, or it's in its pilot delivery as we speak. So when I say I'm writing it, like it's being delivered right now. But and so there's some edits and changes that are happening as we go. But there's a deep study on Alexander Dumas and the Count of Monte Cristo when we get to the humanities and the arts. That is like,
Fun. So yeah,
uh,
you're a literary like humanities type
no, I'm a
person.
little bit of everything, man. That's the thing. Is like
Okay.
I like to like.
I'm not trying to pigeonhole you.
Oh, I don't feel that way. It's just like I would hate for anybody who is literary to hear that and hear me say yes, and then come up to me and ask me if I read this, and it's going to be no for 15 minutes because I've got 10 things that I've read.
You're
I
just
read the
listening to
count.
lots of audiobooks.
Well, then I'll listen, do the same ones over again. So the Count of Monte Cristo, I've read every 2 years for, and the Lord of the
Wow.
Rings, I'll read all of those every year around Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's such
So
such
that's
a
the thing. It's not
commitment.
like I'm a literary person. I just have habits I'm in. So some
Okay,
people,
well, you can
yeah.
call it what you like. I think if you listen to books all the time, you're a literary person.
My mom's gonna be so happy to hear it.
Okay. Did you happen to bring anything for show and tell?
Yeah, I did. So I like to cook a lot, and this is like if you're coming to town, one thing you know is I'm going to invite you over. Let me cook for you, you know, and we'll have a good time and whatever. It's like a thing. And my dad also, when I was growing up, he was a single father for many years and really didn't put a lot of energy into cooking because his energy was spread very thin. But as he's gotten older, we bonded a little bit more over this because he's starting to, you know, he's been growing chilies and peppers and getting a garden and like doing all this stuff that I'm just now kind of getting more into myself. He retired from military service, went in to do a whole bunch of jobs. One of them was woodworking. And one year for Christmas, like bless them, but there's such a tendency to buy gifts that like no one needs or would use. But it's like good. It's I don't know. There's like a notebook, for instance, but honestly, I'll probably lose it before I'm out of the one that I'm currently using. It's like that kind of thing. So this year, my dad was like, "Well, what do you want for Christmas this year?" And I said, "Well, I'd like a cutting board, but I'd like you to make it for me if you could, because he was
Aw,
doing good working, and I want to show you what he presented to me that Christmas. Look at this thing. This
beautiful.
beautiful piece of I asked him for a huge one because I usually am cooking for like 20 people at a time when I'm cooking. And he got me this huge slab with like a graduated I gotta lean it on myself, like
It's sweating
side
on your
there.
head.
It's huge, and it is made of walnut and it needs to be like shined up a little bit. It's a little bit dry at the moment.
Aw,
But
that is so
this is
sweet.
I cried. I absolutely
Aw,
bawled when I opened it. I could not believe the special care and attention. He was gonna grab a piece of wood, and my stepmom grabbed him and said, "Don't you get that piece of wood for this cutting board?" And they went to a special place to go find good wood. And
wow.
yeah, yeah. So it's
That
a
is
really
so
cool.
sweet to see something
Yeah,
that was meaningful to you like that.
yeah, yeah. So that's what I've got to share for Share and Tell today.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, any like without going into a deep rabbit hole, any cosmic forecast type stuff? Mars moved into Virgo, Jupiter's early degrees of Cancer. I'm kind of afraid to talk about the whole Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune these transits with everything that's going on in the country. But
Okay, well,
um,
we can talk about something else. There's a grand trine that's happening this fall between Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. That's really interesting. The Because of the superior planets and their position with the sun and how relatively stable their orbit is, they will station close to the trine of the sun. So this is something that we teach in the STA horary course about those kind of station points. But um, so Jupiter's going to be at 24 Cancer, Saturn's going to be at 25 Pisces, and the sun is entering into Scorpio. So what happens is Saturn's going to station direct just as Jupiter turns retrograde. So it looks like these two are going to be applying to a trine with each other. Arc minutes before that perfects, their direction changes and they don't touch at all,
sad
which is
day.
why if you're building on that Jupiter Saturn trine at any point later in the year, please don't if you want it to work out because that aspect does not form. Now, if you do have to build on it or want to build on it, there is a planet that can help. There's two of them. The sun is going to transit at some stage and do trines to both. And so that can be a translating planet, but that means you need to find the solar role in your election or whatever you're doing to figure out who or what that needs to be to make things move. And the same role could be played by Mars. Mars is moving between them at the same stage in Scorpio and it's in its own sign. The only problem with Mars is it's in the tail end of its sign, the terms of Saturn. It's very close to the end of its phase. It's probably not the Mars in Scorpio I would be turning to for help personally. Also because Cancer is a sign of fall. So I think
Right.
the solar trine is going to be a little bit more helpful. So I'm interested in a lot of developments because there's been a number of things that I've been looking over at the past couple of years where 24 Cancer, it comes up a lot. That's right on the US Mercury, for
That's
instance. But that retrograde of Jupiter on Cancer is going to fall on the US Mercury. When Trump was inaugurated, Mars was at 27 Cancer. So that retrograde station, I think, is going to be one to watch in the fall, November sometime.
cool. I mean, I'm really interested in Grand Trine. That's not going to go anywhere. That's definitely a disappointing kind of situation.
Interesting, right? I mean, I remember a couple of years ago where there was a sextile between Jupiter and Libra and Saturn and Sagittarius that was going to happen at like 18 degrees of their respective signs. And the same exact thing happened where one of them turned retrograde and it just, spoiled all the hopes.
Bummer. Bummer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Maybe sometimes things like that can work in your favor though, if
Yeah,
you want something not to happen.
everything can when you've got enough Jupiter in your chart, you know? And I don't mean that like actually having enough Jupiter in your chart in a literal way. I just mean one of the things that the Abu Mashar said about Jupiter when um, it's combust, or, and I think it's really just talking about being in any kind of afflicted state, is that Jupiter will always try to figure out how to make the most of the situation that it's in, and it doesn't complain. It just figures it out. So we've all got a Jupiter somewhere. We can reach into that, you
Yes,
know?
we do.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this has been so fun. I mean,
Yeah.
I loved just hearing some of your background and things that you've learned over the years, your approach. And thank you for sharing that little anecdote from your dad. That is so beautiful.
Yeah.
That wood cutting board that you received. Where can people find you? I know you have courses coming up. You have your Instagram.
Yeah, so my personal website is wadecaves.com. So you can find me there or on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky at Wade Caves. That's all there. I teach at the STA, School of Traditional Astrology. There are 3 courses that I teach there. The first is, and this is the school's primary course, it is the practitioner's level horary astrology course. It's delivered either online over 20 weeks or in person in an intensive environment. I teach those in New York about once a year, the intensives. But the online version gets more tutors. Deb is on that course, you know, so you get a little bit longer also with the material, 20 weeks. So it's a little slower if you need a little bit more time taking things in. I also teach the astronomy course, which is delivered online, and the pilot delivery of the mundane astrology course is now out, which is cool. So you can find us at sta.co, not .com. That's a different website, sta.co. And that's where you can find us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. I
Yeah, thank you for
really
having me.
hope to
That
stay
was
in
great.
touch. And I know
Sure.
you're gonna be always speaking at different things, so I'm sure I'll see you sometime. You're in New York.
Yeah, I am in New York, and well, I'll be at UAC. You'll be at UAC, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you'll
Yeah.
be at
Okay, I'll be
UAC.
there.
I just
All
I'm
right.
forgetting it now.
Yeah, I will be.
Oh. All right,
All right.
wonderful. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank
It was wonderful
you.
being